Hi, welcome back to Engine Shop Joe. Today we're going to talk about something that's a little bit different, unusual, something you may never see, and I've only seen it about 3 times, I think. But we went out to work on a customer's crane. It was a RT, a link belt RT crane, and so an RT is a crane that has big rubber tires so you can drive it. It's a rough terrain crane, they call it RT. You can drive it around on a job site. You can't really drive it down the road. It's not legal to drive on the road. You'll see them on low boys that sometimes have four axles on the low boy, and it's got giant tires on it, and that's about the heaviest load we haul when you're talking about the whole crane until we get into track cranes. But anyway, so we went out and took a look at this. It had two faults we had to deal with. One was 1896. That was active, and this was a B67 industrial engine, common rail Cummins. So it had a VGT turbo, it had EGR. It did not have a DPF, it had a catalyst muffler on it. So anyway, our guy had been out to clean the EGR valve about a year earlier for the same fault, and it looked pretty rough, so he was going to just put an EGR valve on it and clean the ports out on the intake. So he ordered another actuator because it had faults for not being able, I don't have the numbers, but what it amounted to was not being able to move the turbo to where it wanted to, not communicating with the ECM. So it looked like the actuator board was having a problem and failing. Well, the part number that we needed was no longer available, so there was a technical service bulletin that kind of weaved you through a matrix and took you to superseded part numbers, and the part number that we had was obsoleted. So this was a 24 volt system, not 12. The calibration in the engine was a 24 volt calibration, the whole machine's 24 volts, and the VGT had to be 24 volts. So we get the VGT, we order the part number, we call and check and make sure it's the right one. They order it, pick it up, take it out, put it on. And that's when I find out all this is going on, because I get the phone call. And, well, let's take a look and see. So we had 4956 active after we put the new, or it's actually a Recon VGT on. And it's software out of calibration. The turbocharger actuator software specifically out of calibration. Now the engine ECM code revision on this was 00. That means it's the very first production code. And I checked to see if there was updates to that affected this, and there was only 2 updates, and they didn't have anything to do with this. While we're looking at the faults, 3714 on top that's active, and 4863 that's active. Those are D rates that come along with certain kinds of faults. So the 4863 where it says SCR operator inducement active, that just means the operator ran the machine with an SCR system fault active that caused the machine to drive into a D rate. So maybe, for an example, you might get an active fault that says your def tank's empty, you need to fill it up. And you don't fill it up, you keep driving. Well then, you might log a 4863, and that just means, hey, this is the operator's fault, not mine. That's why 3714 is active, because the operator ran this when he shouldn't have. And that's just an example. So anyway, we've got 4956 active. And let's take a quick look at the other faults that are in here. Go down to the 1883 at the bottom and 3135. This doesn't have a diesel particulate filter on it. It is a catalyst muffler, so there's just temperature sensors on it and it's open. If it had a diesel particulate filter, it probably would have been plugged because the EGR valve was stuck open at 1896. And what it was is this is a very first production code. And sometimes when they build a machine, they'll use an automotive code and tweak things in it. So this was kind of looking for a diesel particulate filter pressure sensor and outlet pressure input, but there weren't any. So I think that's why that was active. And every time you'd key on and off, it would go inactive and there'd be one count. And then we've got coolant level sensor circuit, voltage shorted low. That was a coolant level sensor that they had to replace that went bad. And sensor supply circuit 5 below normal or shorted low. And those were older faults, so we didn't really worry about those. We were really concerned about 4956. So this next slide we're going to look at is where we went to see what was going on with that. Inside of the Insight program, there's a section called Advanced ECM Information. And when you open that, the column on the left, those are the different items you can choose. And we are at the very bottom. We clicked on turbocharger actuator compatibility, and this is what we see on the right. And basically, the bottom box on the left where it says turbo application identifications allowed, you see that 0003174. That is the only turbo ID that's allowed to work with this software package that's in the engine, the ECM code. Now, if you go up to the top where it says monitors, that's actually what's in the turbo. Remember earlier I said this is a 24 volt machine? The actuator voltage was 12 volts. It turned out that the turbocharger actuator interface level for the turbo was 0003144, which was 12 volts counterclockwise. We needed 3174, which is 24 volts counterclockwise. I was told that normally once one voltage level is put into an actuator board, you can't change to a different voltage level. So we replaced the actuator, and the second actuator had the exact same problem. It had the wrong voltage. So this is how we fixed it. In the part of Insight where you can calibrate ECMs, there's also a section where you can calibrate certain programmable data link devices. A data link device is any smart device that is attached to the data bus, and the VGT happens to be one of those devices. Normally, you would never have to calibrate a turbocharger actuator. There was a very few campaigns where they had us calibrating actuators. I think I calibrated turbo actuators maybe 3 times in all the years I calibrated stuff, and those were campaigns. And so this is the firmware that makes the actuator a smart device. And so our problem was ours had a 12 volt firmware in it, and we needed a 24 volt firmware. So the way you fix this is you find the part number of your actuator over on the left. All those yellow tags are actuator part numbers. Our problem was because there was a service bulletin that superseded to a brand new part number, it wasn't in the list. So what we did is we went back and looked at the old actuator number and went through the supersession numbers because they're listed in parts.cummins.com under the engine number. And we found 5452655, and that was the last known part number before the number we have now, and it was in the list. So we highlighted it over on the left. It's about halfway down. You can see a light gray rectangle around it. And then we saw these calibrations, and one of the calibrations, the one that's highlighted in blue up there, is 24 volt, and it happens to be, if you look to the right, application ID 0003174. And that's what the calibration would be compatible with. So we just did a right click, saw transfer to device, we did it, and it calibrated it in about a minute. And our fault code was inactive. We cleared all the faults and ran it, and the world was good again. The only thing that wasn't quite right is when we went back to that screen where you look at the turbocharger actuator, it still said 12 volts, but it had the right application ID, 3174. So I think that was just a programming error where the software didn't put the right number there. It didn't change the 12 to 24. But the machine ran fine, worked fine, and we cleared the faults, and the job was done. Thanks for joining me on Engine Shop Joe.